It's such a pleasure that Morgan Atkinson from Louisville, Kentucky is with us. His work, including the work that we will see today on Thomas Merton and on John Howard Griffin, has been celebrated by showing on public television, as has his work on Gethsemane, the Abbey of Gethsemane, and on music, and on Matthew Kelty, a wonderful Trappist at Gethsemane, and even a film on basketball, which I'm very fond of. It's such a pleasure to have Morgan Atkinson with us to share his work, and so now for several comments of introduction, here's Morgan.
Rochester is a city of the arts, I've learned, and two things I'd like you to look for in the Merton film is the music, which was done by a man named Dick Sisto, who was as a young man, was a friend of Merton's and is now in his probably mid to late 60s, and he's a wonderful jazz vibe player. And so when I was thinking about the music for this, Dick's from Louisville, I went to Dick and he agreed to do it. So give special ears to Dick's good work. And for the art, something that I don't make clear enough in this film is all the art you'll see is done by Merton himself. And one of the pleasures I had was trying to match some of his artwork with what I was thinking was his mood and his mindset at the time. Why I did a film on Merton, it was a sort of a leap for me, though I had done something on his monastery. Merton holds such a high place in my own life that I was intimidated. And then I just thought, well, I can't bring the scholarly depth that Christine or Monica could, but I could hopefully translate the ways that he spoke to me. He was the first person that I could hear saying things spiritually. At that time in my life, I was about 25, most things were just white noise. And here was a person who could speak to somebody at sort of my mid-brow level. And so what I hope this film does is perhaps inspire people to read more deeply into the works of this great man.
In monastic life, it's not independence, but it's freedom that one is seeking. But the freedom is paradoxical, and that it's the freedom that comes from giving up your own will.
One of Merton's friends, a Baptist scholar who brought students to Gethsemane to meet with Merton, once wrote, "Interpreters and biographers of Thomas Merton face a vexing problem, that of contradictions, paradoxes, and inconsistencies in a complex, precocious, inspired personality." I am sure that Morgan would agree, and I trust, having seen the film, you would also agree with that assessment. Recall what we saw, the seascapes and the landscapes and the cityscapes, the views of Gethsemane, both the monastery and the community, the places special to Merton, the tool shed, the hermitage, monks in choir, the woods. It was as though we were there with him. Morgan, what was the most challenging aspect of Merton's life to portray in film?
Well, first of all, how do you show a conversion? I mean, that's hard, impossible. And so you try to indicate with a few images. But probably the most challenging thing, because it is so enticing, was his romantic relationship. As a producer who wants to have your work seen, you know that that's a very enticing piece of information that people not only interested in Merton, but just interested in stories would find interesting. I think it's an important part of the Merton story. Some people have said I dwell too much on it, and so it's a tricky balance. I enjoy humor, and so there's some humorous aspects to it. His tension with the abbot, I just think you could do a whole piece about, because it's the classic management versus labor, and just the way, to have Dan Berrigan say, to sort of, in his way, side with the abbot, I thought, is a nice piece, because he understood that, as much as he may have sympathized with Merton, he was getting into areas that just didn't work if you were going to be a monk.
I am aiming at something the novelist must deal with. Expression of the basically inexpressible. Or perhaps, more exactly, to picture humanity in its mystery.
Griffin, at that time, had received permission from the abbot to produce a photo archive of Merton, not for publication. And because of this interaction, Merton himself became interested in photography. In volumes 6 and 7 of Merton's journals, we hear and read several interactions about his photography and how he was taking pictures of rocks and trees and edges of barns. And when, just before Merton left for his trip to Asia, he and John Howard Griffin had one last walk through the woods, which Griffin said was a photographic journey. And at the end of that, he declared that Merton had really developed a photographer's eye. One of the things that John Howard Griffin says in his own journals of his time at the Hermitage is this: "It means that I give up what I am in order to feed into myself, into my actions and reactions, so much of what he was, Merton, in effect writing a kind of autobiography." And later he wrote, "Black like me was crushing and depressing as a lived experience. Hermit like me is enthralling as a lived adventure. More than enthralling, nourishing in the most robust and jubilant way, overwhelming in its graces, especially when guided by such a hermit as Thomas Merton."